Hello, my friend. Or perhaps I should say, good evening, fellow wanderer of restless nights. If you found yourself here, maybe you're searching for something quiet to hold on to while the rest of the world drifts into dreams. Perhaps you've had one of those days where silence feels heavy, yet the mind refuses to rest. So, let me take your hand, gently, invisibly, and lead you into another time, another place, where shadows moved with intention, where whispers meant more than shouts, and where even the soft scent of perfume could be a mask hiding fear so thick you could almost taste it in the air. Hi, guy. Yes, you, the one listening in the stillness. Tell me, have you ever wondered what courage smells like? Not the courage of generals or kings with their medals and speeches, but the quieter kind, the courage of women who walked alone through the corridors of danger, carrying nothing more than coded words, hidden letters, and a fragile facade of calmness painted with perfume. What did fear feel like on their skin, when bathing was a luxury, when secrecy was worth more than cleanliness, and when even the most intimate rituals of hygiene became a battlefield of deception? Hello again, my friend. I like to imagine that as I speak, you are settling deeper into your bed. The edges of the blanket pulled closer, the light dimmed until the room itself becomes a cocoon. And in that cocoon, let us drift together back to those forgotten moments when female spies women rarely celebrated, often erased, yet endlessly fascinating, had to live with the tension of bodies unwashed for days, garments clinging with the dampness of travel, and fear that carried its own smell, sharp as iron. Now, let me ask you, have you ever caught the faint trace of another person's perfume long after they've walked away? That lingering trail, sweet yet ghostly, almost like a memory that refuses to fade. What if I told you that in centuries past, perfume was not merely a luxury, but sometimes a weapon, a disguise, a curtain pulled across the senses to keep suspicion at bay? For female spies, perfume was more than vanity. It was survival. It was the veil hiding the truth that danger was pulsing beneath their skin, that nerves were unraveling, that hygiene was sacrificed again and again to the necessity of secrecy. My friend, imagine the rhythm of their lives. Long train rides through hostile territories, cramped lodgings where water was scarce and soap scarcer still, nights spent pretending to be someone else, even as the body beneath the costume betrayed them with sweat, with exhaustion, with the raw animal scent of fear. Imagine waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding, knowing the knock at the door could mean discovery. Would you wash then? No, you would press perfume to your wrists, dab it along your collar, as though the fragrance itself could muffle the truth. There is something strangely human, even tender, in this. We often think of spies as shadows, faceless and perfect in their craft. But these women were living bodies, trapped in situations where even their most basic needs were compromised. Hygiene became a quiet torment. Clothes were reworn until they clung with the memory of sleepless journeys. Hair, unwashed, was pinned up tightly, hidden beneath scarves and hats. Skin, deprived of proper cleansing, bore the marks of strain. And yet, when they stepped into a crowded room, they had to appear flawless, untouched by the filth of travel or the rot of fear. Perfume was their silent companion. Lavender, rosewater, jasmine, citrus sweet notes that clung to fabric long after the first application. But beneath the floral softness, another story lingered, because no matter how heavy the fragrance, the body still carried its truth. Sweat has a way of rising through silk. Fear carries a metallic tang that no amount of rose oil can fully disguise. And so, these women lived in the tension between scent and stench, between presentation and reality. You see, history is rarely clean. It is full of dirt under the nails, of damp clothes and unwashed hair, of desperate measures hidden behind delicate gestures. Female spies remind us of this truth. They are not the polished characters of films, gliding through glamorous parties. They are the women who, by candlelight, scrubbed at collars with limited water, who sprinkled powder across their skin to absorb the oils, who held their heads high while their stomachs knotted with the dread of being found out. And yet, my friend, as you listen, perhaps letting your own breath fall into a slower rhythm, consider how strangely comforting this island. Even the bravest lived within the confines of imperfection. Even the most daring carried with them the very human struggle of smell, of sweat, of the body refusing to remain silent. And so, when you drift into this story, let the thought soothe you. History was not made by marble statues, but by living, breathing people, as fragile and flawed as you and I. Let us linger here for a moment longer. Imagine the dim hallway of an inn during wartime. The air is thick with damp wood and candle smoke. A woman passes by, her steps careful, her shoulders squared. She leaves behind a faint trail of perfume orange blossom, perhaps, but if you follow closely, you notice the edges fray. Beneath the blossom, there is the undeniable scent of fatigue, of a dress worn too long, of fear pressing against the skin. She smiles as she greets someone, her eyes calm, her voice measured. But the perfume, that delicate curtain, is already at work convincing the world of a story that her body alone could never tell. And so, my friend, tonight we will wander through the secret lives of these women. We will walk the narrow paths where hygiene was abandoned in the name of survival, where perfume masked more than sweat. It masked the very essence of vulnerability. We will step gently, unhurriedly, into their world of disguises and deception, and we will not rush. For each detail carries weight. Each whisper of scent tells us something about fear, about humanity, about the price of secrets. So rest easy. Let your breathing match the pace of my words, and allow the weight of the day to soften. Together, we will move through time, into dimly lit rooms where shadows held their breath, into trains that carried not just passengers but whole lives balanced on the edge of discovery, into the quiet corners where female spies touched perfume bottles as though they were rosaries, praying for just enough concealment to survive another night. And by the end, perhaps, you will see that even in the filth, even in the disguise, there was something deeply human, a reminder that bravery is rarely beautiful, and survival is often scented with both roses and sweat. There is something about the hush of a railway compartment in the middle of the night that feels almost sacred, as though time itself has curled up to rest, and only the wheels beneath your feet remember to keep moving. Imagine her there, a woman sitting by the fogged glass, her reflection barely visible in the dim glow of the oil lamp. Outside, the countryside passes unseen, swallowed by the dark. Inside, the air is stale, the scent of worn leather seats mixing with the tang of coal smoke, seeping through the cracks. She has been traveling for days. The water from the station wash basins was too cold and too brief, her hands numb before she even touched her face. She has not bathed properly since leaving the city, and yet she cannot allow herself to care. Her mission matters more than comfort, more than the humiliation of skin sticky beneath layers of fabric. She adjusts her gloves, presses a small silver vial of perfume against her wrist, and lets the fragrance spill like a whispered lie, convincing no one but herself that she is still composed. It is in these moments that history becomes tangible, not in the thunder of battles, but in the quiet endurance of the body. Spies lived in thresholds, caught between survival and exposure, dignity and decay. For men, there were different allowances. The sweat of uniforms and the stench of boots excused as the scent of war. But for women, every trace of odor carried a different danger. A man smelling of travel might be a soldier, a courier, an official. A woman smelling of sweat might be judged, interrogated, dismissed from polite company, suspected. And so, her battle was fought with scent. Perfume was not only an accessory, it was armor woven from roses, musk, and citrus peel. Each drop was chosen with care, as if to say, I am harmless, I belong. You have no reason to doubt me. But perfume is fickle. It clings at first, bold and floral, but soon fades into the harsher truth beneath. The body cannot be silenced so easily. Sweat rises from the pores. Fear leaves its metallic shadow at the back of the throat, and no vial, no matter how expensive, can completely erase it. And so the female spy lived with contradiction, outwardly composed, inwardly unraveling. She wore perfume not to fool the world entirely, but to buy herself time, a little space between suspicion and discovery. Like a candle burning too quickly, the fragrance gave her a narrow window in which to move unseen. Consider the mornings after those endless journeys. She would arrive at safe houses tucked into ordinary streets, her boots carrying the grime of train stations, her underclothes clinging with the residue of restless sleep. There might be a basin waiting, perhaps even a pitcher of lukewarm water, but washing fully was dangerous. Too much time with sleeves rolled, with hair uncovered, with garments hanging to dry, each moment increased the risk of being caught in a state of vulnerability. So instead, she splashed only the essentials: the face, the wrists, the edges of the neck. The rest she left concealed beneath powder and perfume. Cleanliness became not a matter of health, but of appearances. Soap was less important than the illusion of refinement. She did not need to be clean, she needed to smell like someone who was. And yet, the irony was heavy. In that time, perfume was made not only to mask odors, but often to mingle with them. Musk, civet, ambergris, animalic notes that deepened the fragrance and allowed it to last longer, clinging to fabric and hair. To modern noses, they might seem overwhelming, even unpleasant. But to her, they were salvation. Because those animal notes blended more easily with the human body's betrayals. Sweat and musk could walk hand in hand without contradiction, a symphony of scents that disguised where one ended and the other began. If fear had a smell, then so did survival. And together, they created something almost believable. My friend, think of the intimacy of this act. Each morning, before stepping into the danger of the day, she leaned over a small glass bottle, unstoppered it carefully, and pressed its cool rim against her skin. The fragrance rose up instantly, familiar, comforting, like a cloak she could draw around her. It was a ritual, a private prayer. The body may be fraying, the skin raw from days without proper cleansing, the hair heavy with oil, but the perfume declared otherwise. And sometimes, that declaration was enough. Enough to smile at a border guard without trembling. Enough to step into a crowded cafe and sit unnoticed. Enough to keep breathing when her lungs ached from panic. But perfume could not silence the body entirely. Clothes absorbed everything. Imagine the fabric of a blouse, worn for days beneath a wool jacket, brushed by smoke, by sweat, by the dampness of night. It became a second skin, heavy with memory. She might try to shake it out, to sprinkle powder across the collar, but nothing could truly erase the life that had seeped into it. And so she carried that heaviness with her. In the quietest hours, when alone, she might peel the fabric away and shudder at the sourness of it. But she had no choice. Put it back on, smooth the wrinkles, spray another veil of fragrance, always moving forward, never pausing long enough to wash away what clung. In these details, we find the strange dignity of survival. It is not in triumphs, not in medals, but in the persistence of living through discomfort. She endured the uncleanliness not because she did not notice it, but because noticing was dangerous. To dwell on her own condition would mean slowing down, hesitating, and hesitation was death. So she folded that awareness inward, pressed perfume to her throat, and walked on. The body became an afterthought, a vessel to be endured, carried, disguised, and perhaps that is what makes her story so deeply human. We imagine spies as distant figures, clever and detached, but the truth is more intimate, almost vulnerable. They were women who lived with sticky skin, with greasy hair, with the ache of unwashed limbs, and yet they held their heads high, not because they were free of discomfort, but because they had mastered the art of carrying it unseen. Fear is a smell, yes, but so too is courage. And when the two mingled, it created something unforgettable, something that lingered long after she had passed by, leaving only a faint perfume trail in her wake. Now, picture the evening streets of a foreign city. The lamps cast pale circles of light on the cobblestones, and the air is thick with smoke from chimneys. She walks slowly, deliberately, her shoes clicking softly. To those passing by, she looks like any other woman heading home after a long day. No one sees the exhaustion beneath her steady gaze, the hunger pressing in her belly, the itch of sweat beneath her blouse. What they notice instead is the faint trace of scent, perhaps rose, perhaps violet, that marks her as ordinary, respectable, unthreatening. Perfume is her disguise, her mask against the world, and as long as it lingers, she can keep walking. This, then, is the paradox. In a life ruled by secrecy, hygiene became both impossible and essential. Impossible because the demands of espionage left no time for luxury, for bathing, for fresh linens. Essential because without the illusion of cleanliness, her cover could be shattered by a single raised eyebrow, a single glance too close. She lived balanced on that edge, her own body the battlefield, and as she lay down at night, clothes still clinging, hair still heavy, she must have wondered how long she could endure it, how many more days of carrying fear like a second skin. And yet, she did endure, not because she was immune to discomfort, but because she learned to bend beneath it, to weave it into her life until it became part of her disguise. The body smelled of travel, of sweat, of fear, but the perfume whispered another truth. And between the two, she survived. There are nights when the silence of a safe house is almost unbearable, when the creak of floorboards feels louder than cannon fire, when the tick of a small clock echoes like the pulse of fate itself. Imagine her sitting in such a room, a rented space above a bakery, the air filled with the faint sweetness of flour and yeast, a smell that might have comforted another person but only reminded her of the life she could not afford to live. She leaned against the washstand, staring at the chipped basin, half filled with cloudy water that had already cooled. She had meant to wash fully, to strip away the layers of travel and fear that clung to her like another garment, but hesitation weighed heavier than dirt. To undress in that small space meant exposing herself even to the walls, as though they too might carry whispers to the ears of strangers. And so she dipped a cloth, wrung it out, passed it over her arms and face, avoiding the chest, the thighs, the places that smelled most sharply of confinement. It was not cleansing, it was a performance for herself, the illusion that she was refreshed, that she could endure one more day without surrendering completely to the decay of her own body. Perfume waited beside her on the table, not a lavish bottle with gilded cap and crystal neck, but a small vial, plain, almost clinical in its simplicity. She lifted it carefully, not rushing, because even in secrecy rituals must be honored. Unscrewing the cap, she brought the glass close, inhaling the concentrated sweetness that rose instantly, sharp enough to sting, delicate enough to soothe. She dabbed it along the hollow of her throat, behind the ears, the wrists, then rubbed her palms together lightly, pressing the fragrance into her skin as if she could merge with it. In that moment, she was not a spy but a woman, craving the comfort of familiarity, building a fragile shield against the knowledge that the clothes hanging on her body were already sour with yesterday's sweat, that her hair clung heavily to her scalp, that the bed waiting for her was unwashed, its sheets coarse with strangers' histories. Perfume did not erase these things, it simply told her she could keep pretending, and pretending was everything. In the world she moved through, suspicion was sharper than knives. A man could endure the grime of travel, the stink of boots, without raising brows. His odor was excused as the smell of duty. A woman, however, was expected to float through rooms with the lightness of soap and powder. Anything less risked attention, and attention was death. She could not allow the truth of her body to betray her. Every inch of sweat, every trace of fear had to be hidden beneath the veil of fragrance. It was not about vanity, it was about survival. Yet, my friend, survival is rarely glamorous. Even as the fragrance settled on her skin, she could feel the persistence of the body pressing back against it. The armpits damp, the waistline of her skirt clinging where sweat had dried and grown sticky, the faint itch on the scalp where hair oil mixed with dust. Perfume was a fragile bridge, stretched over a river that threatened to sweep her away. She could never stay clean long enough to believe the disguise entirely, and so her courage was not the courage of purity, but the courage of carrying forward in imperfection, wearing her flaws beneath a mask of roses. Imagine the morning after. She rose before dawn, the bakery below stirring with the sound of kneading, the smell of yeast thickening as the ovens warmed. She slipped into the street before the first loaves reached the shelves, blending into the pale light of a city still waking. Her coat carried yesterday's creases, her boots yesterday's dust, but her face carried the faint gleam of lavender, the powder of rice pressed thinly across her cheeks. No one looked closely enough to see the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes, the faint grease shining at her temples. They saw only what she allowed them to see, and what they smelled was perfume. The rest remained hers to carry. But there is something haunting in the knowledge that fear itself leaves a trace. Scientists today will tell you that the body excretes different chemicals under stress, that sweat born of fear smells sharper, more acrid than sweat from heat or labor. She did not know the science, but she felt the truth of it. She felt it in the way her own scent shifted during interrogations, when guards passed too close, when questions pressed into her skin like needles. She knew the perfume had to work harder then. Its sweetness pulled tight like a cloak around her, and she prayed it would be enough. To mask fear was not only to act calm, but to silence the very chemistry of her body. Each drop of fragrance was a small rebellion against biology, against betrayal from within. And how exhausting that must have been. To live constantly aware of her own smell, of her own betrayal, to calculate not just words and movements, but how long it had been since the last rinse of water, how heavily sweat had gathered, how quickly the perfume was fading, to live in a constant state of negotiation with her own body, asking it to remain silent, to cooperate, to be less human. There is a cruelty in that quiet expectation. The same cruelty borne by all who walk the line between visibility and erasure. Her body cried for cleansing, for the comfort of warmth and soap, but her mission denied her even that. And so she folded her discomfort into silence, the way she folded her letters into hidden seams, and moved on. Evenings brought their own torment. A woman alone in a rented room could not strip fully without risking discovery. Windows had eyes, walls had ears, and so she washed in fragments. Always fragments: face, hands, collarbones, nothing more. The rest remained, stale and heavy, day after day. At times, she might press linens against her body, hoping the cotton would draw away some of the moisture, but it was never enough. The smell of herself lingered, intimate and humiliating. Perfume, once more, was called upon to rewrite the truth. She dabbed it into the folds of fabric, into the lining of collars, onto scarves that would brush against the air before others could inhale the truth of her. Perfume became her language, speaking where her body could not, a script written in scent rather than words. And yet, there was a strange tenderness in these acts. She cared for herself in small ways, fragile ways, even as she abandoned the larger rituals of hygiene. The touch of perfume was as much for her own sanity as for her disguise. To smell of roses, even faintly, was to remind herself that she was not consumed by the role, that she remained a woman, not merely a vessel for secrets. Perhaps in that moment, she felt the echo of normal life, of vanity, of gentleness, even as the world around her dissolved into suspicion and danger. You may think of this, my friend, the next time you pass someone in the street and catch a sudden fragrance trailing behind them. It is a simple thing, almost forgettable, but in her time, it was lifeblood. Perfume was the fragile line between suspicion and trust, between danger and safety, between being seen as human or as a threat. And though she could never escape the truth of her own body, she could buy herself another hour, another conversation, another chance to slip unnoticed into the shadows. Perfume did not cleanse her. It did not cure the discomfort of damp clothes, the itch of unwashed skin, the sourness of sweat trapped too long, but it whispered a different story. And sometimes, in a world built on lies and disguises, a whispered story was enough to survive. There is a moment, late at night, when the air itself feels thick enough to press against the skin, when the body longs for relief that never comes, and the world narrows to the small discomforts one cannot escape. Imagine her lying awake on a narrow bed in a rented attic room, the slanted ceiling close above her, the air unmoving, heavy with the smell of dust and moth-eaten cloth. She cannot sleep, though she knows she must. For tomorrow her role continues, and mistakes in daylight are unforgivable. She turns onto her side, feels the rough linen against her cheek, the faint sourness of her own sweat trapped in the fabric, the itch of hair that has not been washed for days. She presses her face into the pillow anyway, as though burying herself might suffocate the memory of her body's betrayals. But the body refuses to forget. The skin remembers, the nose remembers. She knows the scent she carries, though others may not yet detect it. And so she reaches, blindly, for the vial at her bedside. It is not luxury, it is necessity. The perfume rests there like a talisman, a small, fragile promise that she can endure another day. She uncaps it quietly, careful even in solitude, as if the walls are listening. The fragrance rises, familiar, like an anchor in the storm. She dabs it at her throat, her wrists, presses a drop against the inside of the pillow where her face will rest again. Lavender tonight. Soft enough to quiet the pulse of panic in her chest. The air shifts subtly, the stale heaviness yielding for just a moment to sweetness. And for a few breaths, she feels almost safe. Not clean, never clean, but sheltered, disguised, as though she can hide even from herself. And this is where the strange intimacy of her world deepens, my friend. For Spies, cleanliness was not about health, but about invisibility. Yet invisibility demanded an extraordinary awareness of the body, a constant calculation of what others might see, hear, or smell. She could not ignore herself the way ordinary people did. Every drop of sweat, every unwashed fold of fabric became a liability. She had to carry her body like a secret, tending to it in fragments, never fully, always enough to keep suspicion away, but never enough to feel relief. It was a form of self-denial that eroded slowly, like water on stone. Consider the mornings after restless nights like these. She rises with the first light, her eyes swollen, her skin clammy from the night's heat. She splashes water sparingly on her face, brushes powder across her cheeks, pins her greasy hair into a bun tight enough to hide its condition. Then the perfume again dabbed into fabric, brushed onto gloves, pressed into the folds of a scarf. By the time she steps outside, she carries a different story. To those she passes, she appears composed, orderly, touched lightly by fragrance. They do not see the sticky weight beneath her clothes, the fatigue hanging on her shoulders, the quiet humiliation of unwashed skin. They see only what she allows them to see, and that is enough. But perfume, for all its power, carried dangers too. Too much, and she risked drawing attention, raising questions of why she masked herself so heavily. Too little, and the body betrayed her. It was a delicate balance, an invisible scale she weighed each day, calculating how much fragrance would erase suspicion without creating it. Imagine the mental strain of such calculations, the endless vigilance, not only in speech and gesture, but in the chemistry of the air around her. She became her own alchemist, adjusting ratios of sweat and rose, fear and musk, desperation and civility. Each morning was a new experiment, each evening a quiet judgment of whether she had succeeded. And how strange, how profoundly human, that survival could hinge on something so ephemeral as scent. Words could be memorized, forged papers could be carried, disguises could be worn, but scent was the most elusive disguise of all. The body insisted on speaking its truth. She could never silence it entirely. All she could do was drown it for a little while, hoping no one listened closely enough to hear the voice beneath. In crowded cafes, the danger was sharpest. She would sit at a small table, porcelain cup before her, steam curling upward with the bitter smell of coffee, mingling with tobacco smoke from men at neighboring tables. The air was dense, layered with scents that both disguised and threatened. She leaned in close when speaking, the perfume on her collar drifting into the air between her and her contact, a soft curtain against the closeness of suspicion. But her heart beat hard enough that she feared its rhythm might betray her, and she knew that with every breath, her body exhaled something beyond her control. She sipped slowly, keeping her gloves on, her posture steady, her smile unremarkable. Perfume shielded her, but she knew it was fragile, like glass that could shatter with one careless gesture. There were nights when she dreamt of water, not rivers or seas, but the simplicity of a warm bath, soap foaming, skin renewed. In her dreams, she submerged herself fully, washing away not only the dirt but the fear, the lies, the exhaustion. But she always woke to the same reality: a basin, a cloth, a vial of fragrance. Never enough to cleanse, always enough to continue. And so she carried on, her body a battlefield, her perfume the only truce she was allowed. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the rhythm of her life, the steady drip of caution, the muffled sigh of fabric that never feels fresh, the faint clink of a perfume vial against wood. These were the sounds of survival, quieter than gunfire, more enduring than speeches. History does not record them, but they are there, lingering in the shadows, in the margins, in the air itself. And perhaps, my friend, this is the truth that comforts us as we drift toward sleep that history was not made by perfection, but by persistence. That the women who carried secrets across borders, who endured interrogations with steady eyes, who survived on scraps of water and dabs of perfume, were not extraordinary because they were unbreakable. They were extraordinary because they were human, deeply human, carrying fear and filth, weakness and willpower, all tangled together and still stepping forward. Perfume on the surface, survival beneath. A disguise, yes, but also a hymn to endurance. And in that quiet hymn, we find ourselves lulled, reminded that even in the dirt, even in the decay, there is resilience. That a body unwashed still rises. That a spirit, weary, still persists. And that sometimes, survival itself carries the faintest trace of roses. There is something almost unbearable about the mornings that arrive too quickly, when the gray light seeps in before the body has found any true rest, when every joint aches from lying too still on a mattress that has never been hers, and when the smell of herself rises with the dawn, as though reminding her she has outlasted one more night, but must still endure the day ahead. She wakes with a start, her eyes open before her mind catches up, her hand instinctively reaching for the small vial on the table, because even before she remembers where she is or what danger surrounds her, her body tells her she must not step into the day without its disguise. The glass is cool in her palm, the liquid within still potent despite the many times she has called upon it. She does not even think as she opens it, tips it, lets the fragrance spill against her wrist, her throat, the hollow between her collarbones. Only when the sweetness rises into the air does she breathe, a slow inhale, as if scent itself has taught her lungs how to remember life. It is in these moments, my friend, that we see how survival is not made of grand gestures, but of rituals so small they seem almost invisible. The world remembers spies for the secrets they carried, the codes they smuggled, the betrayals they endured or orchestrated. But it forgets that every single day they had to face the most ordinary, humiliating truth of the body. Dirt, sweat, oil, the sourness that grows in fabric worn too long. These were not abstractions, but constant companions, whispering against the skin that they were human and therefore vulnerable. She could never let the world glimpse that truth, and so she layered herself not in armor of steel, but in the ephemeral veil of fragrance. Lavender one day, rose the next, sometimes a citrus sharp enough to cut through the fog of exhaustion. Always chosen with care, always applied with reverence, as if each drop were a prayer to whatever gods watched over the unwashed and the afraid. And yet perfume, for all its elegance, was a cruel ally. It lied for her, yes, but it also reminded her of what it could not erase. Beneath the veil, the body still carried its weight, underarms damp, hair heavy with grease, stockings sour with sweat that had dried and returned. A cycle that repeated itself day after day. Perfume masked but did not cure, and she knew this. That knowledge was part of the torment, that even as she walked into a room smelling faintly of roses, she carried beneath the roses the smell of fear, stubborn and metallic. The smell of endurance stretched too thin. It was like patching a cracked wall with fresh paint. The surface gleamed, but the fracture remained, waiting for the moment it might show. Consider her now, moving through a crowded train station. The air is thick with coal smoke, the sweat of travelers, the damp wool of coats pressed too close. To anyone else, the press of bodies is an annoyance, a discomfort endured until the train departs. But to her, each breath is calculation, each step a risk. She knows the perfume she carries will blend into this air, that most noses will not distinguish her from the crowd. But still she feels the terror of betrayal. If someone leaned too close, if someone brushed against her shoulder, would they catch the sourness beneath the rose? Would they hear in their subconscious the language of fear? And would that be enough to unravel her cover? She steadies her stride, keeps her face blank, lets her perfume do its quiet work. The train whistle shrieks, the doors close, and she slips into a compartment, heart pounding, body still her most dangerous enemy. There are evenings when she returns to her room and cannot bear to undress. The thought of peeling away layers of fabric that have clung all day feels worse than leaving them on. To remove them would be to confront the truth of their condition, the yellowed patches of sweat, the stiffness of cloth, the odor that clings no matter how she shakes it out. So she lies down fully clothed, Shoes off but stockings still on, scarf still tight, perfume still clinging. She closes her eyes and pretends the fragrance is stronger than reality, that the body beneath has been washed, renewed, made worthy of sleep. But the body knows better. The body whispers through every itch, every damp fold, every sour trace against the skin. And so sleep, when it comes, is shallow, fragile, adrift rather than a rest. This, then, is the true paradox of her world, that she must ignore the body even while attending to it constantly. She cannot indulge its needs, but she cannot abandon it either. She must dress it, mask it, silence it, without ever giving it the satisfaction of relief. And that silence becomes a kind of second language. She learns to walk with her thighs pressed to prevent the chafing of unwashed skin. She learns to powder her chest where sweat pools, to brush her hair so tightly back that the oil glistens less obviously. She learns to reapply perfume not with abandon but with precision on wrists if she is to shake hands, on collars if she is to lean close, on scarves if she must move through smoke-filled rooms. Always strategic, always deliberate. Perfume becomes not an ornament but a weapon, wielded invisibly in the war of survival. And yet, my friend, how tender it is that she still seeks beauty in this, that even as her body aches, even as her skin longs for cleansing, she chooses fragrances that remind her of gardens, of fields, of summers untainted by fear. Perhaps in those notes, she finds memory, the echo of innocence, the whisper of who she once was before she lived as a shadow. To wear roses when surrounded by danger, to carry lavender into a room heavy with suspicion that is an act of defiance as much as of disguise. She tells the world not only that she is respectable, harmless, forgettable, but also that she is still alive, still a woman, still tethered to the sweetness of existence. Night falls again, and she prepares to leave the safe house. The candle burns low, the papers hidden, the satchel ready. She ties her scarf, fastens her coat, and pauses before the mirror. What looks back at her is a face powdered but weary, eyes ringed with shadows, lips pressed tight. She cannot change these things, but she can change the air around her. She lifts the vial, dabs it once more, breathes deeply, and watches the reflection blur with the rising scent. Then she extinguishes the candle and steps into the dark. The stairwell creaks beneath her. The city air swallows her whole, and she walks into the night, her perfume trailing faintly behind her like a ghost. And so the story continues, unbroken, a rhythm of sweat and roses, of fear and disguise. Not the grand sweep of history, but the intimate, unspoken battle of a body denied and a spirit that refuses to surrender. Each day she survives is not only a triumph of espionage, but a triumph of endurance, of living within her own discomfort and carrying it with grace. That, perhaps, is the truest form of courage. Not the absence of fear, not the absence of filth, but the ability to walk through both while still smelling of roses. There are certain hours in the city when time itself seems reluctant to move, when lamplight pools across cobblestones and shadows stretch themselves longer than they should, when even footsteps sound hesitant, as if they know they are trespassing against the silence. It is in these hours that she walks, alone yet never truly alone, her body wrapped in wool and silk that have long since surrendered their freshness, her breath shallow beneath the scarf wound tightly at her throat. Around her, the city exhales the smells of itself: horse dung gone sour in the gutters, coal smoke hanging low, damp stones sweating from the evening chill. To walk here as a woman alone is already suspicious. To walk here as a woman carrying secrets is a trial against nature itself. She knows her perfume is her shield, that faint veil of jasmine or violet trickling into the air behind her, convincing the night that she belongs. And yet beneath the sweetness, her body argues otherwise: skin chafed, underarms damp, thighs sore from the friction of fabric worn too long. She moves with steady grace, but inside, the truth presses closer with every step. The houses she passes glow faintly, yellow squares of warmth behind curtained windows. Families inside eat their suppers. Children press close to the hearth. Women wash dishes in basins of soapy water. The scent of it drifts out: steam, grease, the faint lemon of soap, and she feels the sting of longing cut sharper than any interrogation. To her, the idea of soap is not ordinary but holy. the simple act of cleansing, now transformed into a dream as distant as freedom itself. She imagines plunging her arms into warm water, the dirt lifting, the smell dissolving, her skin reborn. But she cannot linger on the thought. She must walk, and she must remain untouchable. So she presses her gloved hand to her scarf, as if adjusting it. But truly she is pressing her wrist to her nose, inhaling the perfume she applied earlier, reminding herself she is not filth but disguise, not exposure but shadow. And how curious, how cruel, that the body is most vocal when asked to be silent. The more she wills herself to appear composed, the more she notices the itch along her scalp, the heaviness of her stockings, the clamminess that clings beneath her bodice. It is not pain that torments her, but persistence, the unending reminder that she is never free of herself. Perfume muffles the truth, but does not silence it. And so she learns the art of dissociation, of carrying herself as though she does not inhabit her body fully, as though she is a ghost walking beside her own flesh. The fragrance becomes the self she presents. The body beneath becomes a secret, locked even from her. When she arrives at her contact's apartment, she knocks twice, waits, then knocks once more. The door opens just enough to let her in, and the air changes instantly. Inside it smells of boiled cabbage, of damp wood, of old rugs. She steps through, careful not to brush against the man who closes the door. Their conversation will be brief, an exchange of papers, a few whispered words, but even in this small space, she feels the danger of proximity. He is too close, his nose only inches from her, and she wonders if he smells her truth beneath the perfume. She wonders if the faint metallic tang of fear has reached him, if he senses the body beneath the disguise. But he says nothing, only gestures for her to sit, and she lowers herself into the chair, smoothing her skirt as if to calm herself, as if the gesture could iron away the dampness trapped in its folds. The perfume rises again as she moves, the air shifts, and the illusion holds. She leaves minutes later, her satchel heavier, her steps deliberate, her relief hidden but sharp. Back in her room, she undresses only partially, stripping to the chemise but keeping her stockings on, unable to face peeling them from her legs. She sits on the edge of the bed, her feet bare against the cold floor, and looks at the basin of water she has not yet touched. It sits there, accusing her with its stillness, reflecting the candlelight faintly. She dips her hand, feels the chill, and withdraws it again. To wash would mean to confront the dirt, the smell, the truth. She cannot bear it tonight. Instead, she leans forward, uncaps the vial, and lets another drop fall onto her collarbone. The scent rises once more, and for the 100th time she thanks it silently, though she knows gratitude is misplaced, for perfume is no savior, only a temporary liar. Still, it is the only ally she has left. The nights grow colder as weeks pass, and the damp air turns sharper, biting against her skin. She notices how the cold changes her body's betrayals. Sweat lingers less, but the smell of wool and leather grows stronger, heavier, until it clings to her like another person. The perfume must fight harder now, blending with smoke from the hearths, with the musk of coats never fully dried. She carries more vials, hidden in hems and linings, because the winter demands persistence. Every time she steps into the street, the air crackles with suspicion, as surely as with frost, and she cannot risk a moment when her disguise falters. She is tired of roses, tired of lavender, tired of carrying gardens on her skin while her body rots beneath. But still she wears them, because to wear nothing is to risk being seen, and being seen is to risk being destroyed. And here lies the heart of her endurance, my friend, that she continues, not because she is free of discomfort, but because she has surrendered to it. She knows she will not be clean, not tonight, not tomorrow, perhaps not for weeks. She knows she will sleep in the same clothes, carry the same smells, endure the same humiliations, and still she walks, still she meets, still she survives. Courage does not erase the filth. It walks with it, perfumes it, disguises it long enough to pass unnoticed. The candle burns low once more. She lies down, her body stiff, her mind racing. She inhales deeply, lets the perfume fill her lungs, and closes her eyes. Outside, the city groans with its own odors, smoke, rot, damp stone, but in her mind she carries something else. A memory of clean water, of sunlit gardens, of a body renewed. Perhaps one day she will feel it again. But tonight, she must sleep in disguise. Perfume pressed against sweat. Roses laid over fear. And so she drifts, half in dream, half in survival, her body still whispering but her spirit refusing to break. There are days when the world itself seems to lean too heavily upon her shoulders, when the act of breathing feels like a confession, when the fabric of her clothing clings so stubbornly that she cannot remember what it felt like to be untouched by dirt. On such days she moves through the city as though floating, her eyes lowered, her pace steady, her face carved into composure, while inside she fights against the simple truth of exhaustion. She can no longer tell if the smell that clings to her is hers alone, or if the streets themselves have swallowed her whole, coating her skin in coal smoke and dust, embedding themselves into her very pores. And yet, amid this dull torment, she still finds herself reaching for that vial, the single thread that ties her to a version of herself the world must believe. She opens it in secret, lets the scent rise, and with it comes the illusion of control, as if she has smoothed the wrinkles not only from her clothing but from her fate. Each drop of fragrance is measured against danger. Too much, and suspicion follows her like a shadow, the sweet sharpness raising questions she cannot afford. Too little, and her own body threatens betrayal, whispering truths into the air. She walks this line every day, like a tightrope strung between invisibility and exposure, knowing one misstep could undo her entirely. Her survival depends not only on memory or courage, but on the chemistry of scent, on the fragile balance between roses and sweat, lavender and fear. And how strange, how quietly cruel, that such delicate details carry the weight of life and death. She remembers moments when the danger grew so thick it seemed to suffocate her. A cafe filled with smoke, men's voices rising in argument, boots striking against floorboards, the air heavy with beer and leather. She sat in the corner, gloved hands folded neatly, her satchel resting by her feet. Across from her, a man leaned close, his breath sour with tobacco, his eyes scanning her face for cracks. She felt the heat climb her body, the sweat prickling at her temples, the unmistakable saltiness gathering beneath her arms. She knew he would smell it, knew her body was betraying her faster than her voice could conceal it. And so she shifted, casually, as though brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, and in that gesture she touched her scarf where she had pressed perfume earlier. The fragrance lifted between them, subtle but insistent, and she watched his expression soften by the smallest degree. He leaned back, lit another cigarette, and dismissed her. She left minutes later, her knees trembling, her satchel safe. Perfume had lied for her, and the lie had saved her life. But even victories such as these carried their cost. For every moment when the fragrance protected her, there was another when it mocked her, reminding her that beneath it she remained unwashed, unchanged, still trapped in the same body she longed to escape. She thought often of the women she had once been among, the ones who bathed in warm water, who washed their hair with oils, who wore dresses fresh from the laundress's hands. That world seemed distant now, unreachable, as though it belonged to another lifetime. Her reality was powder on greasy skin, perfume on sour fabric, water splashed sparingly in basins that never truly cleansed. And yet she endured, not because she did not feel the humiliation, but because she could not allow herself to collapse beneath it. There were times, in the quiet after missions, when she sat alone and removed her shoes, peeling them from her swollen feet, and the smell rose like an accusation. She wrinkled her nose, ashamed though no one else was there to witness it, and reached again for the vial. She dabbed perfume on her ankles, on the inside of her stockings, trying to overwrite what lingered. It worked only for a moment, only long enough for her to breathe without disgust, only long enough to remember that she was more than her body. But as the hours stretched on, the truth returned, and with it came despair she dared not voice. For who could she tell? Who could she confess to? That the greatest enemy she fought was not the interrogator or the patrol, but her own sweat, her own skin, her own scent. And yet, in this battle, she discovered a peculiar strength. For every time she silenced her body with fragrance, she grew more skilled at silencing her fear with composure. The two became intertwined. If she could mask one, she could mask the other. Her body taught her resilience in ways her mind never could. Each day she rose in the same unwashed clothes, pressed perfume to the same skin, and stepped into the same dangers. Each day she endured without collapse was proof of a quiet courage that did not seek recognition. History would not record her discomfort, her grease, her odor, but these were the very fibers of her survival. There were moments, too, of strange tenderness. Once, after a long journey, she found herself in a small inn where the hostess, a woman with kind eyes, offered her a bowl of warm water. It was not much, barely enough to wash her face and hands, but she took it gratefully, dipping the cloth and pressing it against her skin. The warmth sank into her pores, loosening the dirt, and for a brief moment she felt human again. She leaned close to the bowl, inhaling the faint scent of soap that clung to its rim, and almost wept. Afterward, she dried herself quickly, reapplied her perfume, and stepped back into her disguise. But that night, when she lay down, she carried with her the memory of warmth, the fleeting reminder that beneath the layers of fear and fragrance, she was still alive. And so the days became weeks, the weeks, months, each one marked not by triumphs, but by these small rituals of endurance. She could not always measure her success in documents delivered or secrets secured, but she measured it in the fact that she still walked the streets, still breathed, still carried her vial. To survive was to persist, even in filth, even in fear, even in the endless repetition of masking and reapplying. Perfume did not free her from the body, it taught her to bear it, to walk with it, to endure its betrayals, while still convincing the world of another truth. And perhaps that, in the end, is what made her remarkable. Not that she conquered fear, but that she carried it with roses. The candle gutters in her room, the shadows lengthen, and once again she lies down, fully dressed, her satchel beneath the bed, her perfume vial within reach. She inhales deeply, lets the fragrance settle into her lungs, and closes her eyes. Outside, the world is sharp with suspicion, heavy with danger, but within the small radius of her breath, there is lavender, there is rose, there is the faintest illusion of safety. And that illusion is enough. For tonight, at least, she will sleep in disguise, and tomorrow she will rise again. There are evenings when the streets themselves seem to lean inward, as though the city is conspiring against her, each doorway a possible eye, each window a mouth waiting to open in accusation. She walks with measured pace, her shoes striking the cobblestones softly, but the sound feels too loud, carrying farther than it should. The lamps are dim tonight, the air heavy with mist rising from the river, and the smell of damp stone presses close against her nose. Beneath her scarf she feels the heat of her own breath, sour with hunger, and she wonders if the mist clings to her as it does to the walls, amplifying the odors she tries so hard to conceal. She reaches into her pocket, fingertips brushing against the familiar glass of the vial, and the reassurance steadies her. To know it is, there is to know she can still write the air around her, can still decide what story her scent tells to those who pass too near. Inside a tavern at the edge of the square, she sits at a corner table, the wooden surface sticky with spilled beer, the air thick with smoke and sweat. Men laugh too loudly, boots shuffle against the floor, and a fiddler scrapes at a tune in the background. The smell is almost unbearable, a chorus of unwashed bodies, sour ale, damp wool, tobacco. But within this chaos, she is safer. Here her own body's betrayals are hidden, drowned in the collective odor of the room. Still, she does not trust chance. She touches her scarf, adjusts it as though tightening against the draft, and in doing so, releases the faintest thread of fragrance. It mingles with the smoke, with the beer, with the musk of men, and becomes almost invisible. Yet it works, because it insists quietly, beneath the chaos, that she belongs. No one looks twice at her. No one questions why she sits alone. She is simply another shadow in a room of shadows, her perfume a silent alibi. Later, when she slips out into the night, the silence feels sharper than before, as though the tavern had dulled her senses, and now the city has stripped them bare. She walks quickly, not daring to linger, the air cold against her cheeks. Her body aches with fatigue, her skin clammy beneath the layers of fabric that have not been washed for weeks. She thinks briefly of burning the clothes, of shedding them like a snake's skin, and stepping clean into a new self. But she knows such thoughts are luxuries. Instead, she must endure, must continue to live inside the same garments, the same sweat, the same endless compromise. Perfume is all that keeps her tethered to dignity, the last fragile bridge between the truth she carries and the lie she must present. And yet there are nights when even perfume feels insufficient, when she is certain the world must smell her fear. She remembers once standing in line at a checkpoint, the guard's dog sniffing the air as if scenting her secrets. She felt the sweat bloom across her back, the metallic tang of terror rising beneath her perfume. And for a moment she was sure it was over. The guard stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, the dog straining at its leash. She tilted her head, offered a faint smile, and in that motion let the perfume rise from her collar. The dog whined, distracted, and the guard waved her through. She walked away slowly, but her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might betray her. Perfume had saved her once more, but she could not forget how close the body had come to undoing her. Back in her room, she sat trembling, the vial clutched in her hand as though it were a weapon. She held it to her chest, inhaled deeply, and felt her breath steady. But the relief did not erase the truth that she was living on the edge of exposure every moment, that the very air could betray her. She pressed the vial to her lips as if it were a prayer, whispering silently into the night. Not words, not pleas, but a rhythm of breath, the fragrance rising into her lungs until she felt human again. What she endured, my friend, was not only danger but the erosion of self. Each day without cleansing, each night in the same stale clothes, each hour lived in compromise, stripped something from her, and yet she refused to vanish. Perfume was not only a disguise but a declaration. That she remained alive, that she remained herself, that she would not be reduced to the stench of fear alone. She wove roses into her sweat, lavender into her grease, jasmine into her hunger, until she became something new, a creature of contradictions, a woman whose very survival was written in fragrance. The city changed with the seasons, and so did her rituals. In summer, the heat was merciless, drawing sweat from every pore, soaking her clothes until they clung to her skin like damp rags. Perfume had to fight harder then, chosen sharper, citrus, or mint to cut through the heaviness. In winter, the cold pressed her body into stillness, sweat receding but the smell of damp wool thickening, musty and stubborn. Then she chose muskier notes, heavier fragrances that blended with the weight of coats and scarves. Always adapting, always calculating, she became a master not only of codes and signals but of the invisible language of scent. To survive was to speak fluently in this language, to know when to whisper with roses and when to shout with musk, when to disappear into the smoke of taverns, and when to carry a note of violet into the clean air of an officer's hall. And still, beneath all this, the longing remained. Longing for water, for soap, for the simple relief of a body unburdened by filth. She thought of it like a dream she carried inside, a hidden garden where she might one day return. But until that day, she lived as she must, her perfume both shield and shackle, her body both vessel and enemy. Each night she lay down with the vial close. Each morning she rose with it in hand. And in this endless cycle she found her rhythm, not triumph, not peace, but rhythm, the steady beat of survival, scented faintly of roses. There are nights when the smallest sounds unravel her, when the groan of a shutter in the wind or the crack of wood in the wall sets her pulse racing, not because the noise itself is dangerous, but because it reminds her of the truth she cannot escape, that she is always being listened to, if not by people then by the air itself, and the air remembers everything. She lies still in the bed, her coat still on, her scarf still wound tightly. The perfume she pressed to her throat hours earlier, now faded into the stale mixture of dust and sweat that hangs around her. She does not move at first, holding her breath as if even the rhythm of her lungs might betray her. But the body demands what the body always demands. It exhales, it sweats, it leaks its truths into the night. She cannot stop it, and this helplessness gnaws at her more deeply than hunger ever could. She reaches for the vial almost without thinking, uncaps it in the darkness, and lets a drop fall onto the fabric near her collar. The sweetness blooms again, faint but real, and she inhales sharply, as though she has been granted a second skin. Perfume does not silence the world, but it teaches her how to live inside it, how to breathe when she would otherwise drown. She remembers, with startling clarity, The time she had to spend 3 days hidden in the cellar of a boarding house, waiting for a signal that it was safe to leave. The air down there was damp, heavy with mildew, the stone walls weeping moisture that seeped into her clothes. There was no light, save for a single candle. She dared not burn too long. No sound but the distant creak of footsteps above, and no relief from the smell that grew around her. Her own body rebelled, sweat pooled, hair plastered to her scalp, clothes clinging until she could barely tell where fabric ended and flesh began. She tried not to breathe too deeply, ashamed of the odor she carried, even though no one else was there to notice. But shame is not logical. It grows even in solitude. By the second night, she was nearly mad from it. Clutching the vial in her hand like a rosary, she dabbed perfume into the darkness, pressing it against her own wrists, her own scarf, even against the damp stone itself, as if she could change the very air around her. And in a way, she did. The cellar smelled of mildew and fear, yes, but it also smelled faintly of jasmine. That faintness was enough to remind her she was still a person, not just a shadow rotting in the dark. When at last she emerged, blinking into daylight, she carried the smell of the cellar with her, and she knew the perfume had not erased it, only layered it. But that was the truth of her life. Everything layered, never clean, never erased, only disguised. She wore her body like a palimpsest, each day written over the last, each trace of sweat and perfume, mingling until she could no longer separate them. To survive was not to cleanse but to layer, to stack lies upon lies, until they built a mask strong enough to pass inspection. And yet beneath it all, she remained the same, fragile and filthy, longing for a bath she might never have. Sometimes, in quieter hours, she thought of the women she had known before this life, friends who had worried over their appearances in gentler ways, who had chosen perfumes for flirtation or vanity, not for survival. They dabbed roses behind their ears before dances, pressed lavender into their gloves before carriage rides, sprinkled powder into their hair before visiting parlors. She envied them now, not for their innocence but for their ignorance. They did not know the weight perfume could carry, the way it could decide whether one lived or died, the way it became the final line of defense against discovery. To them, fragrance was ornament. To her, it was armor. And yet, sometimes, when she pressed a vial to her skin, she remembered them, remembered laughter in rooms untainted by fear, and for a fleeting moment, she felt part of that world again. There is cruelty in how the senses betray her. Eyes can be trained to lie, voices taught to disguise, even hands stilled into calmness. But smell tells the truth whether one wants it or not. She knows that her fear smells different than her labor, that the sweat born of panic has an edge sharper than salt. She knows others sense it too, if only subconsciously, and that is why she relies so fiercely on perfume, not only to distract, but to rewrite the very script of her presence. Where fear would speak of vulnerability, roses speak of composure. Where sweat would announce suspicion, lavender whispers of gentility. She has learned to weaponize sweetness, to turn fragrance into camouflage. And yet, each time she applies it, she is reminded that it is only temporary. Time always wins. Fragrance fades, sweat resurfaces, and the body insists once again on being known, and still she persists. There is no triumph in her endurance, no glory in her disguise. There is only persistence, night after night, day after day, carrying a body she cannot cleanse, masking it with a scent that cannot last, and stepping into the world as though she were untouched. That is the true bravery history forgets, not the codes, not the weapons, not the daring escapes, but the quiet, humiliating endurance of living inside a body that betrays her while convincing the world otherwise. Her perfume is her last ally, her final thread of dignity, and she clings to it even as it reminds her of all she has lost. Tonight, as she prepares once more to leave her room, she stands before the mirror and studies herself. The powder cannot hide the hollows beneath her eyes. The scarf cannot erase the oil from her hair. The clothes hang heavy with wear. She looks tired, diminished, almost ghostly. But when she dabs perfume along her collar, the reflection changes. It is not that she appears fresher or cleaner, it is that she smells of roses, and roses tell a story the mirror cannot. She inhales deeply, lets the fragrance anchor her, and then steps away. The mirror stays behind, but she carries the lie into the night. And so the night receives her, as it always does, folding her into its damp silence, carrying her footsteps across the stones, hiding her beneath the weight of mist. Somewhere in the dark, she knows, others are watching, listening, waiting. But they will not smell her fear tonight. They will smell roses. And that, for now, is enough. There are certain mornings when the body wakes before the mind, when she opens her eyes, not because she has rested, but because discomfort has forced her from the half-dream she was clinging to. The dampness beneath her arms, the itch of hair matted against her scalp, the sourness of fabric that has wrapped itself around her for too many days. These are alarms louder than any clock. She sits up slowly, the room gray with dawn, the air stagnant, and for a moment she lets the truth of herself settle in. She stinks of her own survival. She reeks of fear, endured too long. It would be easier to weep, but tears are indulgent, and indulgence is a currency she does not possess. Instead, she reaches for the vial, always within arm's length, and lets the drop fall onto her wrist. The fragrance rises, sweet, floral, merciful, and she presses her nose to it as though inhaling life itself. Only then does she stand. Only then does she believe she can step out into a world waiting to consume her. Outside, the city has already begun, its rhythm carts rattling over stones, vendors calling, smoke rising from chimneys, and with it comes the chorus of smells she must blend into. The butcher's stall stinks of blood, the fishmonger reeks of salt and brine, children run past smelling of sweat and dust, women carry baskets fragrant with herbs. Among them, she must be unnoticed, indistinguishable, neither too clean nor too foul, simply ordinary. Her perfume guides her through this theater, softening her presence, placing her in the category of acceptability. She does not smell of rot. She does not smell of panic. She smells of lavender, faint, almost fading, just enough to suggest composure. No one knows the filth beneath, the days-old sweat beneath her blouse, the stockings stiff with wear. They cannot know, because the perfume insists otherwise, and the world believes what it prefers to believe. But there are encounters that test her more cruelly. Once, she found herself seated across from a man in a closed carriage, the air too still, their knees nearly touching. He watched her with the casual curiosity of one who suspects nothing, and yet she felt exposed. The space was too small, the air too intimate, and she was sure he could smell the salt of her fear beneath the perfume. Her heart pounded, her breath came shallow, and she imagined the words forming in his mind. She is hiding something. So she shifted slightly, as if adjusting her gloves, and in that moment pressed her wrist against the fabric of her skirt, releasing a fresh wave of fragrance into the carriage. The man blinked, then smiled faintly, as if reassured by the ordinariness of her scent. The ride continued in silence, but she carried the terror of those minutes long after, the knowledge that her life had hung on the delicate balance between roses and sweat. She knows now that survival is not only a matter of outwitting others, but of outlasting her own body's betrayal. She can disguise her voice, control her gestures, memorize her codes, but she cannot command her pores to stop excreting fear, cannot order her scalp to cease producing oil, cannot beg her underarms to remain dry. The body does not negotiate with espionage. It reveals itself stubbornly, shamelessly, and so she negotiates with fragrance instead, enlisting it to stand guard at the threshold of suspicion. Every time she applies it, she is not adorning herself but silencing herself, teaching her own flesh to lie, yet the cost is heavy. Perfume clings to everything, her scarf, her coat, the papers she hides in her satchel, until even in solitude she smells of her own disguise. At times, she wonders if she has become nothing more than a moving cloud of fragrance, a ghost stitched together from roses and musk, with no body beneath. She fears that when she is finally free, if freedom ever comes, she will have forgotten what she truly smells like. The thought unsettles her more than she admits, for to lose one's scent is to lose oneself, to become permanently masked. And still, the longing persists. She dreams of water, as other people dream of lovers warm, abundant, embracing. She imagines it pouring over her shoulders, carrying away the layers of perfume and sweat until she is bare again, until the air around her speaks only of her and not of disguise. But dreams dissolve, and reality remains. A basin, a cloth, a vial, the same cycle repeated endlessly. She wonders if her skin will ever forgive her, if her lungs will ever breathe without the weight of roses, if her body will ever stop whispering betrayal. But she has no time for wondering. Each day demands performance. Each hour, another lie told through scent. Tonight she must attend a gathering, a room filled with uniforms and polished boots, where suspicion lingers like smoke and every glance weighs heavily. She dresses carefully, shaking out the same clothes, pressing powder onto her cheeks, tying her hair tightly. The perfume she chooses is heavier, muskier, designed to blend with tobacco and leather, to speak of refinement rather than nerves. She dabs it along her collar, breathes deeply, and steels herself. When she enters the hall, heads turn briefly, then look away, satisfied by what they sense. She smiles faintly, moves among them, and feels the relief that comes not from safety but from successful deception. No one will remember her, and that is the point. Later, when she returns to her room, her body sags beneath the weight of the disguise. She collapses into the chair, unfastens her coat, and inhales. The air is thick with perfume and sweat, indistinguishable now, a single heavy presence. She presses her face into her hands, feeling the grease against her palms, and wonders how much longer she can endure. But then her eyes fall upon the vial on the table, still half full, still waiting. She reaches for it, as she always does, and applies it once more before lying down. The fragrance rises, forgiving her, disguising her, saving her once more. And so the cycle continues, unbroken, relentless, scented faintly of roses. There are times when exhaustion becomes a second skin, when it no longer feels separate from her but sewn into her very being, when even her thoughts move sluggishly, as though weighed down by the same grime that clings to her body. She moves through the city in such a state now, her eyes steady but her mind drifting, each step an act of discipline rather than energy. The clothes she wears have lost their shape, the fabric too heavy with the memory of weeks without proper laundering. But she smooths the creases with her palms, brushes at the sleeves, and carries on. She knows appearances matter more than truth. To the world, she must be a woman of composure, touched faintly by fragrance, ordinary in every sense. Only she knows that beneath the roses lies fatigue so deep it could hollow her from within. On a day like this, the perfume feels almost cruel. She uncaps the vial, dabs it to her wrists, and the sweetness rises, fresh, alive, as though mocking her decay. And yet she cannot resent it, for it remains her only defense. Without it, she would be raw, exposed, her body's betrayals naked to the air. With it, she can walk through checkpoints, sit at cafe tables, pass unnoticed by guards who might otherwise smell the salt of her fear. Perfume does not cleanse, it does not restore, but it convinces, and convincing is enough. She steps once more into the crowd, her scent whispering a story her body cannot. There are encounters that carve themselves into her memory, not for their drama, but for their intimacy. Once, on a train, she shared a compartment with a woman and her child. The boy, no more than 6, leaned against her arm as he slept, his small body warm and unashamed. She sat rigid at first, terrified that he might stir the odor she carried beneath her scarf. But the boy breathed deeply, untroubled, and whispered in his sleep that she smelled like flowers. The mother smiled faintly, too tired to speak, and in that moment something softened inside her. Perfume had lied for her, yes, but it had also given this child comfort, a memory of roses in a time of war. She stroked his hair gently, her own eyes damp, and when the train arrived, she slipped away before the boy could wake. But she carried his words with her, tucked beside her codes and secrets, as proof that even in disguise, she had not been erased entirely. Yet there were darker moments too, moments when fragrance betrayed her by clinging too stubbornly. She remembers walking into a room where men sat smoking, and one of them wrinkled his nose, remarking that she smelled too fine for such company. It was said lightly, a joke, but her heart lurched, for suspicion often wore the mask of humor. She laughed along, offered some excuse about a landlady's soap, and the men nodded, distracted. But afterward she vowed never to wear perfume so boldly again. Survival required balance too little, and she was exposed. Too much, and she was questioned. She lived in that fragile middle ground, a tightrope of scent that only she could measure, a line she walked with every breath. The seasons turned again. and with them the character of her disguise. Summer brought the cruelty of heat, sweat soaking her garments until the perfume evaporated too quickly, forcing her to reapply again and again until the vial grew dangerously light. Winter brought the opposite, a cold so sharp that her body barely perspired. But the heavy coats and scarves trapped every odor close, making the air around her thick with the mingling of wool, dampness, and the fading ghost of fragrance. Each change demanded adaptation, calculation, and she grew skilled at choosing the right mask for the right moment, as though she were less a woman than an alchemist, blending her own humanity into something survivable. And yet, my friend, beneath all the calculation remained the same longing, the same dream of water. She imagined it often now, not in the romantic haze of fantasy, but in aching detail. The warmth of it against her skin, the feel of it rushing over her scalp, the sound of it spilling into a basin. She imagined soap foaming, imagined the smell of herself stripped bare of disguise, imagined what it would be to breathe without roses, without lavender, without musk. That dream both sustained her and tormented her, reminding her of what she fought for, even as it reminded her of how far she was from it. She knew she could not afford to indulge in longing, but longing seeped in anyway, as persistent as sweat, as inescapable as scent. One evening, after days of relentless travel, she found herself in a church, empty except for candles burning faintly at the altar. She slipped inside not to pray but to rest, sinking into a pew, her satchel clutched against her chest. The air smelled of wax and incense, and for once her own odor seemed hidden, drowned in the sanctity of the place. She closed her eyes, inhaled the mingling of smoke and perfume, and felt tears rise. Not for fear, not for fatigue, but for relief. The relief of being in a place where her body could dissolve into the air without suspicion. She lit a candle before leaving, not because she believed in miracles, but because the act itself was a kind of cleansing, a way of releasing what she carried. As the flame flickered, she dabbed perfume once more onto her wrist, merging her disguise with the incense of the church, and walked out renewed enough to endure another day. But endurance is not without cost. She has begun to notice how her skin resents her, how rashes form beneath collars, how her scalp aches from hair bound too tightly, how her pores seem clogged with the residue of sweat and scent. She ignores it as best she can, for attention is a luxury, but the pain grows sharper. Still, she presses perfume to herself, presses dignity into her flesh, convinces the world and herself that she is whole. She wonders, sometimes, what will remain of her body when this life is done, if she will emerge scarred, not only in mind, but in skin, marked forever by the compromises she was forced to make. Perhaps she will never smell only of herself again. Perhaps roses will haunt her to the end. Yet even with these thoughts, she carries on. She must. For each day is another chance to deliver her secrets, another chance to walk unseen, another chance to persist. And persistence, more than triumph, is what history forgets to honor. She does not ask for statues or stories. She asks only that she survive long enough to see a day when she can bathe without fear, when she can strip away disguise and breathe as herself again. Until then, she will live in fragrance and filth, roses and sweat, dignity and despair, all tangled together. Tonight, as she lies once more in her narrow bed, the vial rests on the table beside her, nearly empty now. She knows she must make it last, knows she cannot afford another. She tips it carefully, lets a single drop fall onto the fabric near her neck, and inhales. The scent is faint, weaker than before, but it is enough to lull her into a fragile calm. She closes her eyes, listens to the silence, and allows herself to drift. Outside, the world still hunts, still suspects, still waits. But here, within the radius of her own breath, there are roses, and roses are enough.